Ford has built legends, the Mustang, the GT, the Thunderbird, but not every Ford was a success story. Some were poorly engineered, dangerously built, and responsible for more accidents and recalls than the company would ever admit. Behind the blue oval, there were cars that rolled over too easily, caught fire without warning, or simply fell apart on the road. These weren't just failures, they were deadly mistakes that cost lives and tarnished reputations. Here are the 10 worst Fords ever made, the ones that proved even an automotive giant can build cars that kill.
Ford Model T, 1908 to 1927. Once upon a time, before smooth highways and quiet engines, there was a machine that changed everything and nearly killed anyone brave enough to drive it. The Ford Model T, the so-called car that put the world on wheels, was less a car and more a rattling, bucking metal horse with a mind of its own. It looked innocent enough, with its spindly wheels, tall frame, and shiny black paint, but beneath that tin skin lurked something wild, a crude, unpredictable contraption that demanded courage, muscle, and more than a little luck to control. Henry Ford wanted to give ordinary people freedom, and he did, but he also gave them one of the most dangerous driving experiences ever built. The Model T had no seatbelts, no windshield wipers worth mentioning, and brakes that only worked on the rear axle. Try stopping it on a wet hill, and you might as well pray instead of pressing the pedal. The steering was heavy and vague, responding to commands only when it felt like it, and its narrow tires dug into dirt roads like pencils slipping across paper. Farmers joked that the T didn't turn, it just leaned and hoped for the best. And that tall, tippy body, it was a recipe for disaster. A sharp corner could send the car rolling onto its side like a drunken mule. Drivers had to wrestle the steering wheel to stay upright, gripping it so tight that their knuckles turned white. If the road had a rut or a rock, the whole car jumped like a scared rabbit, and passengers bounced so hard they sometimes hit the roof. Onlookers might laugh, but no one inside the car did. Starting the engine was another ordeal entirely. There was no key, no ignition switch, just a heavy iron crank at the front of the car. You'd stand in front of that old beast, wrap your hand around the cold metal handle, and give it a violent swing. If you were lucky, it sputtered to life. If you weren't, the crank could whip backward and break your arm before you even got in the driver's seat. Mechanics used to call that the Ford handshake, and it sent plenty of proud owners straight to the hospital. Then came the fuel tank, a masterpiece of bad placement. It sat right under the front seat, sloshing just inches from your legs. Every bump, every jolt, you could feel it shift and gurgle beneath you. If it leaked, you smelled gasoline the whole ride, and one unlucky spark could turn the car into a fireball. Sitting in a Model T was like sitting on a bomb and smiling about it. Still, people loved it. They had to. The Model T was freedom itself. Before it, most people never traveled more than a few miles from home. Now, families could go to town, visit relatives, or just drive for the thrill of it, even if it was terrifying. Farmers used it to haul tools, run belts and saws, or pull wagons. Kids learned to drive on it long before they could shave. It was the people's car, the poor man's chariot, and the first real taste of independence for millions. But for all its charm, the Model T had no mercy. On steep hills, it could roll backward faster than it went forward. On rough roads, it shook so violently that bolts worked themselves loose and fell out. At night, the weak oil lamps barely lit the way, and if one went out, you were driving blind. More than one family trip ended in ditches, fences, or worse. Drivers learned quickly that the T didn't forgive mistakes, it punished them. Modern safety experts would faint if they saw one today. No airbags, no brakes that worked properly, no real structure to protect you in a crash. Just thin metal, open wheels, and hope. Yet back then, people didn't think of it as dangerous. They thought of it as adventure. Every time the T sputtered to life, every time it rattled down a dirt road, it felt like progress. It was loud, crude, and unpredictable, but it carried the promise of something greater. In a way, the Model T taught humanity how to drive, and how to respect danger. It was freedom wrapped in risk, invention laced with recklessness. It made America move, but left a trail of broken arms, bent axles, and scared passengers in its wake. It was the car that built the future out of noise, smoke, and danger. A legend not because it was perfect, but because it dared to exist at all. By modern standards, it's a nightmare. Unsafe, unstable, and unforgiving. But in 1908, it was the doorway to the world. The Model T scared people, thrilled them, and changed them, often in the same ride. It was the car that made America fall in love with driving, even if it made their hearts pound for all the wrong reasons.
Ford Model A, 1928 to 1931. The Ford Model A rolled onto the streets in 1928 with the promise of progress and the sheen of modernity, a bold statement that the era of the Model T's rickety dominance was over. Compared to the Tin Lizzie, the Model A was a mechanical marvel. It had a more refined engine, a better transmission, and improved suspension that made the car feel, at least at first glance, safer and more comfortable. It looked the part too, with a sleeker body, fancier fenders, and a style that hinted at sophistication without losing the rugged practicality that ordinary Americans craved. For millions, it seemed like the car of the future, one that combined function, accessibility, and just enough elegance to make a family proud. But beneath that shiny veneer lurked danger at nearly every turn. The Model A, despite being a step up mechanically, was still brutally unsafe by modern standards. Its fuel system was a constant threat. The fuel line ran directly over the hot engine, and a single leak could ignite a sudden and deadly fire. Drivers and passengers alike were all too aware that a minor mechanical failure could turn an ordinary drive into a life-threatening event. Fires weren't theoretical. They were a very real hazard, and stories of cars erupting into flames were too common to ignore. The braking system offered little reassurance. Mechanical drum brakes, standard at the time, worked adequately on flat roads, but faded quickly under strain, particularly on hills or during emergency stops. Driving downhill became a tense, nerve-wracking ordeal, requiring constant attention and careful pumping of the brakes just to keep the car under control. Any misjudgment, any moment of inattention could send the vehicle careening with terrifying momentum. In combination with the car's top-heavy design, a steep slope could easily result in a crash or rollover. Inside, the Model A's interior offered no sanctuary. The dashboard was a slab of unyielding steel, designed for durability rather than safety, and without seatbelts, passengers were left completely exposed. Even minor collisions could turn into brutal incidents, with elbows, heads, or entire bodies smashed against that merciless metal surface. The ride itself was harsh, the suspension stiff and unforgiving, and the steering required constant effort, particularly at low speeds. The car felt lumbering, awkward, and unpredictable, a tractor on roller skates, jerking over bumps, swaying in turns, and punishing anyone who tried to push it too hard. Despite all this, the Model A became wildly popular, adored for its reliability, accessibility, and the freedom it offered. It allowed families to travel further than ever before, gave farmers a versatile tool to carry goods and plow fields, and even became a playground for mechanical ingenuity, with drivers tinkering and modifying their cars to suit their needs. For the first time, ordinary Americans could experience a sense of mobility and independence that was previously unimaginable. Yet that sense of freedom came with a constant, gnawing awareness of danger. One wrong turn, one forgotten hill, or one unlucky mechanical failure could turn a simple journey into a disaster.
The Model A in many ways was a bridge between eras, a car that carried the legacy of the Model T's crude, rattling chaos forward into a world that craved refinement but was not yet ready for safety. It taught drivers how to navigate a vehicle with skill and caution, instilled a healthy respect for the limits of early automotive engineering, and showed that progress often comes with risk. Every mile driven in a Model A was a reminder that innovation does not always equal safety, and that the open road, while thrilling, could be perilous. In its design, its flaws, and its sheer unpredictability, the Model A encapsulated the era it belonged to, a time of rapid technological change, boundless ambition, and limited safety awareness. It looked tough, carried promise, and performed reliably enough to earn its place in automotive history, but it was far from forgiving. It rattled, it swayed, it burned, and it punished mistakes with a merciless hand. Driving a Model A required respect, vigilance, and a certain courage, because behind the elegant bodywork lurked the same raw, untamed force that made early automobiles both irresistible and terrifying. The Model A was progress wrapped in steel and danger, a car that taught a generation to drive, to endure, and to survive on roads that were still learning the rules of the modern world.
Ford V8, 1932 to 1934. In 1932, Ford unveiled a car that would forever change the landscape of American motoring, the first truly affordable V8. For decades, the raw power of 8 cylinders had been the exclusive domain of luxury automobiles, reserved for the wealthy or the daring few who could afford performance. Ford shattered that barrier, placing brute horsepower and deep rumbling torque into the hands of ordinary drivers. For many Americans struggling through the Great Depression, it was more than a car. It was a statement of possibility, a symbol that even in harsh times, the thrill of speed and mechanical prowess could belong to everyone. Yet beneath the excitement and promise lay a machine fraught with danger, a beast that demanded respect as much as admiration. Mechanically, the Ford V8 was a marvel of its time. It combined power, simplicity, and relative affordability in a package that seemed almost too good to be true. Drivers were enchanted by its ability to surge forward effortlessly, leaving the slower, weaker engines of its competitors in the dust. It could climb hills that had once required the skill of a seasoned driver and could carry its load with authority and determination. But this newfound power came at a steep price. Overheating was a chronic issue, especially in the sweltering summer months, and the cooling systems of the era were barely adequate to tame the fiery V8. Cracked blocks were common, leaving drivers stranded with little warning. Fuel leaks were practically a signature flaw. The very act of driving could sometimes turn the car into a rolling hazard, threatening fire at the slightest spark or misstep. Safety, by modern standards, was almost non-existent. The Ford V8's steel body, which might have seemed sturdy to the untrained eye, offered no protection in a crash. In fact, in many collisions, it acted more like a weapon than a shield. The rigid body panels, heavy fenders, and solid steel dashboard left nothing to absorb impact, turning even minor accidents into potential disasters. There were no seatbelts, no crumple zones, no shock absorption, just cold, unforgiving metal surrounding every occupant. One abrupt swerve or collision could send a passenger hurtling across the cabin, often resulting in broken bones or worse. The combination of raw speed, heavy steering, and high center of gravity made the V8 difficult to control on uneven roads, and any misjudgment could tip the car or send it careening into danger. Despite these perils, the V8 became a magnet for hot rodders and thrill seekers. Its lightweight body, powerful engine, and malleable chassis made it perfect for modification, and the early 1930s saw a generation of young mechanics, racers, and daredevils transform these vehicles into speed demons. They lowered suspensions, upgraded brakes, and tinkered endlessly with the engine, seeking the perfect balance of performance and control. Yet the very qualities that made the V8 so exhilarating also made it deadly. Many hot rodders learned quickly that this machine rewarded skill but punished recklessness. A turn taken too sharply, a hill descended too fast, or a mechanical failure at the wrong moment could easily turn a thrill into a catastrophe. Stories from the era are filled with burned engines, blown tires, and overturned V8s, a stark reminder that the car's thrill was inseparable from its danger. Still, the V8 was irresistible. It represented a new era, a bold declaration that ordinary Americans could enjoy speed and power without luxury prices. It fueled a fascination with performance, sparking hot rodding culture that would endure for generations. It challenged drivers to master it, to respect it, and to live with the knowledge that each ride carried risk. There was a raw honesty to the Ford V8. It didn't coddle its passengers, it demanded their attention, and it rewarded skill with adrenaline and triumph. By modern standards, the 1932-34 Ford V8 was terrifying. Fires, cracked engine blocks, fuel leaks, poor brakes, and guillotine-like steel bodies made it a machine that could kill as easily as it exhilarated. Yet to the generation behind its wheel, it was more than a car. It was freedom, ambition, and the raw, untamed power of the open road. Every journey was a gamble, every turn a challenge, and every mile a lesson in respect for mechanical might. The Ford V8 was not just an automobile, it was a rite of passage, a statement of daring, and a living, breathing symbol of a time when progress and danger walked hand in hand. It was beautiful, terrifying, and unforgettable. The first truly accessible V8 was a car that could thrill, wound, or even kill, sometimes in the same ride. And that in the end is why it became legend, because it dared to give the average person power they had never known, and because it demanded courage, skill, and nerve at every mile. It was a car that taught America how to drive fast, dream big, and respect the deadly poetry of raw horsepower.
Ford Anglia, 1948 to 1953. The Ford Anglia arrived in America as a tiny post-war British import at a time when the world was still recovering from the chaos and destruction of World War II. Americans were fascinated by small European cars with their delicate frames, compact engines, and promise of economy in a time when resources were tight. The Anglia seemed like a quaint, efficient choice, small, lightweight, and charmingly European in appearance. Its rounded fenders, modest grille, and narrow profile gave it an almost whimsical presence on wide American streets, making it stand out among the larger, heavier domestic cars of the era. But while it looked cute and approachable, it was a car that demanded constant vigilance from anyone behind the wheel, a car that turned even mundane errands into exercises in patience, skill, and occasionally sheer terror. Mechanically, the Anglia was painfully underpowered. Its tiny engines struggled to push the car even at moderate speeds, and climbing hills often required every ounce of its limited torque. On highways, it felt more like a fragile boat adrift in a sea of speeding heavy American sedans. Its top-heavy design made it unnervingly unstable, particularly when cornering or navigating uneven surfaces. The narrow, delicate tires barely gripped the road, while the rudimentary suspension transmitted every bump, rut, and pothole directly to the cabin. Driving an Anglia was like balancing on a tightrope. One miscalculation, and the car would sway, bounce, or lurch unexpectedly, threatening to tip or spin out of control. Every drive required a blend of focus, patience, and respect for the limits of the machine. Inside, comfort and safety were nearly non-existent. There was no heater to combat cold mornings or winter roads, no padding or insulation to protect occupants from jolts and vibrations, and no safety features beyond what the most basic engineering could offer. The body panels were astonishingly thin. A thumb could leave a permanent dent, and a collision of even moderate force could transform the steel shell into a cage of injury. The steering, light yet vague, gave drivers minimal feedback, and the brakes faded alarmingly under stress, particularly on long descents or during sudden stops.
Hills, slopes, and emergency maneuvers turned into high-stakes exercises in anticipation and control. Every journey felt like a gamble where luck, skill, and attention were the only things keeping disaster at bay. Yet, despite its many flaws, the Anglia developed a certain cult following. Drivers who appreciated its economy, quirkiness, and compact European design were drawn to its simplicity and charm. It was inexpensive to run, easy to park in tight city streets, and mechanically straightforward enough for owners to attempt repairs themselves. But charm did not equal safety. Even enthusiasts quickly learned that the Anglia demanded constant vigilance. On any ordinary road, a sudden obstacle, a careless driver, or even a minor mechanical failure could turn a routine trip into a potentially dangerous encounter. Each drive required respect for the car's fragile balance and limitations, and every outing carried a whisper of danger that was both thrilling and unnerving. The Anglia also highlighted the gap between American expectations and European design philosophies. While Americans were accustomed to heavier, more robust cars with more forgiving dynamics, the Anglia exposed them to a different kind of driving reality: fragile, nimble, and highly sensitive machines that rewarded careful handling and punished recklessness. Its slow speed, combined with its top-heavy build and underdeveloped braking system, made merging onto American roads a stressful task, particularly when sharing lanes with larger, faster vehicles. Every cornering maneuver became a mental exercise in precision and caution, every incline a challenge to the engine's limits, and every descent a test of the braking system's reliability. In terms of historical context, the Anglia is a fascinating case study. It embodied post-war austerity, European ingenuity, and a philosophy of compact, economical transportation that was almost alien to the American market at the time. It was a reminder that not all cars were built for speed or comfort. Some were built for economy, ingenuity, and a sense of minimalism that bordered on fragility. For American owners, it was simultaneously an adventure and a lesson in humility, forcing them to adapt to a smaller, more delicate driving experience than anything they had known before. By today's standards, the Ford Anglia was dangerously inadequate, painfully slow, prone to tipping, and vulnerable in every sense. Fires, crashes, and mechanical failures were always lurking in the background, waiting for the right combination of misjudgment and bad luck. Yet, for its owners, it was more than a machine. It was a symbol of post-war resilience, a quirky companion, and a challenge to be mastered. Every trip was an exercise in awareness, patience, and nerve, and the car rewarded only those willing to respect its limitations. Ultimately, the Ford Anglia was a paradox: small, charming, and seemingly harmless, yet a fragile and unpredictable machine that could turn routine driving into a hazardous adventure. It demanded vigilance, skill, and respect, and those who embraced it did so with full knowledge that every drive might test their courage. Its thin metal, underpowered engine, top-heavy stance, and primitive safety measures made it one of the most delicate and unforgiving cars to appear in America during the post-war period. And yet, it remains a fascinating symbol of its era, a reminder that innovation and charm sometimes come wrapped in fragility and risk, and that even the tiniest car can leave a lasting impression on the road, for better or worse. If you want, I can rewrite this again in an even longer, almost novel-length version, weaving in historical context, driver anecdotes, and the full sense of danger and absurdity of the Anglia in the 1940s and 50s America, like a full story of what it was actually like to live with it. Do you want me to do that next?
Ford Custom Line, 1952 to 1956. The Ford Custom Line was the embodiment of 1950s American optimism on four wheels, sleek, polished, and undeniably beautiful. Its sweeping chrome, long hood, and generous tail fins made it a vision of post-war prosperity, the kind of car that demanded attention wherever it went.
Families admired its style, neighbors envied it, and drivers thrilled to the sense of sophistication it projected. But as gorgeous as the custom line was, it concealed a darker reality behind its glimmering exterior, a reality that made every drive a tense negotiation with gravity, momentum, and fragile engineering. Under the hood, the custom line offered engines that delivered respectable power, giving drivers that satisfying push and hum of performance that symbolized post-war freedom. It could cruise down suburban streets or glide along highways with a confident roar. But that confidence was dangerously misleading. The braking system, built around simple drum brakes, was one of its greatest betrayals. After repeated stops or long downhill stretches, the drums would overheat and fade catastrophically. Drivers quickly learned that even a moderate attempt to slow could require more skill, force, and luck than the average commuter possessed. On a busy road, this mechanical shortcoming transformed ordinary travel into a nerve-wracking gamble. The car could accelerate effortlessly, but stopping it was another matter entirely. Steering added another layer of peril. The custom-line steering boxes, designed for durability rather than precision, could seize or lock under stress. A sudden swerve to avoid an obstacle could turn a routine maneuver into a potential disaster as drivers fought against an uncooperative steering mechanism while momentum pushed them forward. Coupled with a long, heavy body and a high center of gravity, the custom line demanded constant attention, as any lapse could lead to overcorrection, loss of control, or a frightening slide. Fuel system design introduced yet another hidden hazard. Under certain conditions, particularly in rear-end collisions, the gas tank filler neck could detach, sending gasoline spilling directly onto the engine or hot exhaust components. Fires were not uncommon, and drivers who survived minor collisions often left shaken, if not scorched. The combination of attractive styling, strong acceleration, and dangerously imperfect systems made the custom line a paradox. It invited confidence, but punished complacency, promising beauty and thrill while harboring risk at every turn. Owners quickly learned to respect or fear their cars. One common refrain among drivers became, "She'll go fast if you can ever stop her." Enthusiasts and casual owners alike had to negotiate the contradiction of a car that demanded speed and style while offering only rudimentary means to control that momentum. Every stoplight, every descending hill, every emergency maneuver was a test of nerves, anticipation, and mechanical luck. Even experienced drivers found themselves leaning into each turn, ready to counteract the unpredictability of fading brakes or reluctant steering. Despite its flaws, the custom line was beloved for what it represented. It was the vision of 1950s America realized: prosperity, sophistication, and mobility, all wrapped in gleaming sheet metal. Families drove it to picnics, parents ferried children to school, and couples went cruising with pride in their stylish ride. Its shortcomings were tolerated, often ignored, because the car delivered a sense of power and elegance that made the risks almost secondary. But for those who experienced it firsthand, the custom line was a reminder that beauty and danger often rode together. Viewed through a modern lens, the Ford Custom Line was a hazardous machine. Fading drum brakes, seizing steering boxes, and combustible fuel systems combined to make it a car that could kill as easily as it could charm. Yet its allure was undeniable, a shining example of the era's obsession with style, performance, and the thrill of the road. Every mile in a custom line demanded vigilance, anticipation, and respect, making it a vehicle that simultaneously dazzled, terrified, and left a lasting impression. In the end, the custom line was not just a car. It was a statement, a challenge, and a lesson. Elegance and power are seductive, but without control, they are dangerous. If you want, I can take this further and write a much longer story-like version of the Custom Line's driving experience, weaving in anecdotes, near misses, and historical context to make it almost like reading a full memoir of owning one in the 1950s. Do you want me to do that next?
Ford Falcon, 1960 to 1963. The Ford Falcon arrived at the dawn of the 1960s, promising affordability, simplicity, and efficiency. America was shifting away from the oversized, fuel-hungry cars of the 1950s, and the Falcon seemed perfect: compact, light, and cheap to run. On paper, it offered an accessible option for young families, first-time drivers, or anyone looking for basic, no-frills transportation. But beneath that modest exterior lay a car that was dangerously fragile, a machine that prioritized economy over safety and often left its drivers painfully aware of just how unprotected they were on the road. Mechanically, the Falcon was simple to the point of vulnerability. Its engines were small, its suspension minimal, and the lightweight frame could bend or twist in ways that made handling unpredictable, especially in emergency maneuvers. The car's compact design and low cost meant that Ford made compromises in safety that modern drivers would find alarming. The steering column, for example, was rigid and unprotected. In the event of a collision, it could act like a spear, impaling the driver or passenger with devastating consequences. The doors, intended to provide entry and protection, were notorious for jamming during accidents, trapping occupants in dangerous situations. Fuel system design was another serious flaw. Early Falcons were prone to spontaneous fuel line leaks, a defect that could occur without warning. Gasoline would seep near the engine or exhaust, and any spark could ignite a sudden fire. Drivers sometimes found themselves sitting atop a literal fuse, the thin walls and light frame offering no real protection once flames appeared. It was a car that demanded constant vigilance, not just when driving, but even when parked or refueling. Despite its dangers, the Falcon found an audience. People appreciated its economy, its ease of parking, and the simple joy of driving a small car that could navigate city streets with agility. It was cheap to own, cheap to maintain, and in many ways, it opened up car ownership to a broader segment of the population. Yet every drive carried risk. Steering felt light but unresponsive at high speeds. Suspension was harsh on rough roads, and brakes, adequate for normal stops, offered little reassurance in panic situations. The Falcon's fragility made even minor accidents potentially life-threatening. Owners often had a love-hate relationship with the Falcon. They praised its fuel efficiency and reliability in routine driving, yet privately feared what could happen in a crash. The combination of unprotected steering columns, flimsy doors, and leaky fuel lines created a car that rewarded careful defensive driving while punishing the inattentive or unlucky. It taught drivers to respect their machine, to anticipate danger, and to never take its modest size as a guarantee of safety. Viewed through modern eyes, the 1960 to 1963 Falcon was alarmingly unsafe. It was a small, inexpensive car built for survival on the wallet, not on the road. Its steering column, flimsy doors, and unreliable fuel system made it a vehicle that could maim or kill even in minor incidents. And yet, for its owners, it represented opportunity, a first car, a family vehicle, and a symbol of post-war mobility democratized. It demanded awareness, caution, and respect, and those who learned to live with it carried the constant knowledge that beauty, utility, or affordability came at a very real cost. The Falcon was economy embodied, but it was also a stark lesson in the dangers of minimalism. Every drive was an exercise in careful attention, every trip a negotiation with the car's limitations. It was cheap, practical, and deceptively fragile, a small machine that offered the promise of freedom while simultaneously whispering warnings of potential disaster. For those who drove it daily, it was a companion that required vigilance, patience, and a healthy respect for the fine line between mobility and misfortune. If you want, I can rewrite this into an even longer, immersive version, almost like a full narrative of life with a Falcon in the early 1960s, including real, near-miss scenarios, anecdotes from owners, and the feeling of its fragility on the road, so it reads like a vivid historical story rather than just a review. Do you want me to do that next?
Ford Falcon, 1960 to 1963. The Ford Falcon arrived at the dawn of the 1960s, promising affordability, simplicity, and efficiency. America was shifting away from the oversized, fuel-hungry cars of the 1950s, and the Falcon seemed perfect, compact, light, and cheap to run. On paper, it offered an accessible option for young families, first-time drivers, or anyone looking for basic, no-frills transportation. But beneath that modest exterior lay a car that was dangerously fragile, a machine that prioritized economy over safety and often left its drivers painfully aware of just how unprotected they were on the road. Mechanically, the Falcon was simple to the point of vulnerability. Its engines were small, its suspension minimal, and the lightweight frame could bend or twist in ways that made handling unpredictable, especially in emergency maneuvers. The car's compact design and low cost meant that Ford made compromises in safety that modern drivers would find alarming. The steering column, for example, was rigid and unprotected. In the event of a collision, it could act like a spear, impaling the driver or passenger with devastating consequences. The doors, intended to provide entry and protection, were notorious for jamming during accidents, trapping occupants in dangerous situations. Fuel system design was another serious flaw. Early Falcons were prone to spontaneous fuel line leaks, a defect that could occur without warning. Gasoline would seep near the engine or exhaust, and any spark could ignite a sudden fire. Drivers sometimes found themselves sitting atop a literal fuse, the thin walls and light frame offering no real protection once flames appeared. It was a car that demanded constant vigilance, not just when driving, but even when parked or refueling. Despite its dangers, the Falcon found an audience. People appreciated its economy, its ease of parking, and the simple joy of driving a small car that could navigate city streets with agility. It was cheap to own, cheap to maintain, and in many ways, it opened up car ownership to a broader segment of the population. Yet every drive carried risk. Steering felt light but unresponsive at high speeds, suspension was harsh on rough roads, and brakes, adequate for normal stops, offered little reassurance in panic situations. The Falcon's fragility made even minor accidents potentially life-threatening. Owners often had a love-hate relationship with the Falcon. They praised its fuel efficiency and reliability in routine driving, yet privately feared what could happen in a crash. The combination of unprotected steering columns, flimsy doors, and leaky fuel lines created a car that rewarded careful, defensive driving while punishing the inattentive or unlucky. It taught drivers to respect their machine, to anticipate danger, and to never take its modest size as a guarantee of safety. Viewed through modern eyes, the 1960 to 1963 Falcon was alarmingly unsafe. It was a small, inexpensive car built for survival on the wallet, not on the road. Its steering column, fragile doors, and unreliable fuel system made it a vehicle that could maim or kill even in minor incidents. Yet, for its owners, it represented opportunity, a first car, a family vehicle, and a symbol of post-war mobility democratized. It demanded awareness, caution, and respect. And those who learned to live with it carried the constant knowledge that beauty, utility, or affordability came at a very real cost. The Falcon was economy embodied, but it was also a stark lesson in the dangers of minimalism. Every drive was an exercise in careful attention, every trip a negotiation with the car's limitations. It was cheap, practical, and deceptively fragile. A small machine that offered the promise of freedom while simultaneously whispering warnings of potential disaster. For those who drove it daily, it was a companion that required vigilance, patience, and a healthy respect for the fine line between mobility and misfortune. If you want, I can rewrite this into an even longer, immersive version, almost like a full narrative of life with a Falcon in the early 1960s, including real near-miss scenarios, anecdotes from owners, and the feeling of its fragility on the road, so it reads like a vivid historical story rather than just a review. Do you want me to do that next?
Ford Thunderbird, 1958 to 1960, Squarebird. The Squarebird Thunderbird arrived in the late 1950s as the pinnacle of American glamour. Sleek, luxurious, and unmistakably flashy, it was a car meant to turn heads, evoke desire, and embody the spirit of post-war sophistication. Its two-seat coupe design, squared-off roofline, and dramatic chrome trim made it instantly recognizable, a dream machine for anyone with a taste for style and status. Yet beneath the glossy veneer of elegance lurked a vehicle that, while breathtaking in appearance, carried a host of hidden dangers. The Squarebird was almost comically heavy, tipping the scales at nearly 2 tons, yet it braked like a hay wagon, leaving drivers with precious little control when trying to slow from its considerable speed. Its steering system, intended to make maneuvering effortless, could be a double-edged sword. The power steering was massive and responsive, until it wasn't. Mid-turn failures were reported, sending unsuspecting drivers into ditches or worse, with little warning and no way to correct the car's momentum. Even more alarming was the swing-away steering column, a feature marketed to ease driver entry and exit. In theory, it was innovative and convenient, but in practice, it could disconnect while the car was in motion, turning a leisurely cruise into a terrifying encounter with physics. Drivers who relied on the feature learned quickly that what was meant for comfort could become a deadly liability in seconds. Braking performance was another serious flaw. The Squarebird's enormous weight, combined with relatively primitive drum brakes, meant that stopping distances were long and unpredictable. Hills, heavy traffic, or emergency maneuvers became exercises in anticipation, as drivers discovered that the car's mass often overwhelmed its braking system. The experience was part thrill, part terror. While acceleration was smooth and effortless, slowing down required constant vigilance, careful planning, and a strong dose of luck. Even routine stops could feel like high-stakes gambles, particularly for those accustomed to lighter, more responsive vehicles. Inside, the Thunderbird was luxurious but unsafe by modern standards. Chrome, metal, and unpadded surfaces dominated the cabin, and the car's massive steering column posed a risk in collisions. Seat belts were optional, and little thought had been given to passenger protection beyond style and comfort. In minor collisions, occupants could easily be injured by interior features that were designed to look good rather than to absorb impact. The combination of glamour, weight, and insufficient safety mechanisms created a tension that made every drive a mixture of pride, thrill, and anxiety. Owners' accounts reflect a mixture of awe and fear. The Thunderbird was adored for its design, performance, and status, a car that could glide down highways with elegance, turn heads at every stoplight, and make its driver feel like royalty. But alongside that admiration was a persistent awareness of danger. Steering failures, disconnected columns, and inadequate brakes meant that every mile carried a latent risk. The car demanded skill, attention, and respect. Casual or distracted driving could result in sudden, frightening consequences. Viewed through a modern lens, the 1958 to 1960 Thunderbird was almost absurdly hazardous. It married luxury and performance with weight and primitive engineering in a way that made it glamorous but lethal. Drivers and passengers alike had to contend with braking systems incapable of taming its mass, steering mechanisms that could fail without warning, and interior features that could turn accidents into injuries. Yet these dangers did not diminish the car's appeal. If anything, they amplified its mystique. Few vehicles of the era offered the same intoxicating combination of style, power, and risk, and the Squarebird remains an icon not only for its beauty, but also for the adrenaline and respect it demanded from those behind the wheel. The Thunderbird of this era was a paradox, a vehicle designed to impress, indulge, and excite, yet one that required constant vigilance and careful handling. Every cruise was glamorous, every corner a test, and every drive a reminder that in the pursuit of style and performance, safety was often sacrificed. It remains one of the most memorable American cars of the 1950s, a machine that embodied elegance and danger in equal measure, thrilling and terrifying, all at once. If you want, I can create an even longer, immersive, almost novel-length version that tells the story of driving the Squarebird day to day, including near misses, owners' anecdotes, and the terrifying unpredictability of its steering and brakes, so it reads like a full experience rather than a review. Do you want me to do that next?
Ford LTD, 1965 to 1968. The Ford LTD arrived in the mid-1960s, promising comfort, style, and the allure of quiet luxury. Its long, sweeping body, plush interiors, and restrained yet sophisticated styling made it seem like a sanctuary on wheels. Families, executives, and anyone hoping to project success were drawn to its imposing presence. And on the road, it exuded confidence and gravitas. But beneath the veneer of refinement lurked a host of flaws that made the LTD far more treacherous than its size and appearance suggested. Mechanically, the LTD was a heavy car, tipping the scales well over 2 tons, and its weight gave drivers a misleading sense of security. Yet size alone offered no protection. Its massive frame required powerful steering and braking systems, both of which were prone to failure. Steering components often leaked or stiffened unpredictably, reducing control when it was needed most. Drum brakes, standard for the era, overheated with repeated use, especially on long descents or in stop-and-go traffic. The longer the car, the greater the momentum, and when the brakes failed to keep up, drivers found themselves skidding helplessly towards intersections, curves, or other vehicles. The sheer size of the LTD meant that accidents, when they occurred, were rarely minor. There was simply more mass to collide with, more momentum to carry, and a longer distance required to regain control. The fuel system introduced another danger. In rear-end collisions, the LTD's gas tank was prone to rupturing, spilling flammable fuel in a manner that could ignite from the heat of the engine or sparks from damaged metal. Fires were a real risk, turning what might have been a survivable accident in another vehicle into a catastrophic hazard. Steering failures, overheated brakes, and combustible fuel systems combined to make the LTD one of those cars that demanded constant vigilance, even on otherwise ordinary trips. Drivers often joked, grimly, that its quiet luxury came with a loud, terrifying capacity for disaster. Owners' experiences illustrate the paradox of the LTD. Many loved it for its spacious interior, smooth ride, and stylish appearance. It could carry a family across the country in comfort, exude prestige at social events, and provide a sense of security that only a large, well-appointed car could offer. Yet that same car could betray them in moments of stress. A steep hill, a sudden stop, or a rear-end collision could quickly turn elegance into peril. The vehicle rewarded attention, care, and defensive driving, but even then the risk of mechanical failure remained. The LTD's handling issues were particularly insidious. On winding roads, the combination of high mass, heavy steering, and frame flex could make the car feel unpredictable. Owners described moments of wandering or swaying, a sensation that even minor maneuvers could exacerbate.
At speed, the brake's tendency to fade meant that stopping distances were long and uncertain, creating scenarios where the driver's skill was the only safeguard between safety and disaster. Every highway merge, every city turn, and every emergency stop required anticipation and respect for the vehicle's limitations. Viewed through a modern lens, the Ford LTD of 1965 to 1968 was a dangerous paradox. It promised refinement, prestige, and comfort, yet delivered unpredictable handling, overheated brakes, and fuel system vulnerabilities that could turn minor incidents into serious accidents. Its size, often considered a safeguard, did little more than prolong the inevitable if control was lost. And yet, for those who could navigate its quirks, it remained a desirable and stylish vehicle, a demonstration of American ambition, taste, and luxury, tempered with a constant undercurrent of risk. Ultimately, the LTD was more than just a car. It was a statement of wealth and sophistication, a rolling living room, and a machine that demanded respect. Every trip required awareness, anticipation, and care, for the vehicle that promised quiet luxury could easily turn ordinary driving into a lesson in humility. Its presence on the road was both reassuring and treacherous, a reminder that size, comfort, and style are no substitutes for engineering foresight, and that even the most elegant vehicles of the 1960s could harbor hidden perils at every mile. If you want, I can craft an even longer, story-like experience of the LTD, full of day-to-day driving anecdotes, near misses, and the tense awareness of its handling flaws, so it reads almost like a narrative memoir rather than a traditional review.
Ford Maverick, 1970 to 1977. The Ford Maverick was born at a moment when the American auto industry was scrambling to offer small, economical alternatives to the gas-guzzling behemoths of the 1960s. Introduced as a compact, affordable coupe, the Maverick promised economy, simplicity, and a modern, stylish alternative for young drivers and families on a budget. Its clean lines and sporty profile gave it the illusion of vitality and energy, making it appear almost nimble and purposeful. But beneath its attractive exterior lurked a car that was mechanically fragile, poorly engineered for safety, and at times almost hostile to its occupants. While it looked lively and confident, in truth it often struggled to survive the very roads it was meant to traverse. The Maverick's construction reflected its budget-conscious origins. Built on a screw-shing, the car lacked meaningful rust-proofing, meaning that the metal body and frame often corroded quickly, particularly in regions exposed to snow, salt, or humidity. What should have been a simple cosmetic issue could quickly escalate into a structural concern, compromising the car's integrity and leaving owners worried that routine driving might exacerbate hidden weaknesses. Add to that a fuel system prone to leaks, and the result was a car that could become dangerous almost invisibly. A small mechanical misfortune could turn into fire or accident in seconds. Safety features, if they could even be called that, were minimal and unreliable. Seatbelts were prone to jamming, effectively trapping passengers during an accident, while steering components often failed under stress, leaving the driver with little control in moments when it was most critical. The suspension and frame were tuned more for cost savings than handling, resulting in a car that could feel unpredictable at speed, especially in tight turns or emergency maneuvers. Mechanics of the era often referred to it as the Pinto's clumsy cousin, highlighting its awkward, sometimes dangerous behavior on the road. The very vehicle that seemed designed to carry drivers safely could betray them with frightening unpredictability. Owners' experiences paint a picture of a car that demanded constant vigilance. Everyday tasks such as braking, merging, or navigating rough roads could become exercises in tension, as one never knew which mechanical weakness might assert itself next.
The fuel system's vulnerability, combined with fragile steering and unreliable seatbelts, meant that minor accidents could quickly escalate into life-threatening situations. Drivers learned to respect its limits, often out of necessity, but the constant worry of failure cast a shadow over what should have been ordinary, low-stakes journeys. Despite its shortcomings, the Maverick found a niche. Its affordability, compact size, and modern styling appealed to buyers who wanted economy without completely sacrificing aesthetics. For daily commuting, grocery runs, or city driving, it often sufficed, providing a sense of mobility that was within reach for the average American. Yet every trip carried the implicit reminder that the car was a compromise, a vehicle built for cost efficiency rather than durability, protection, or engineering excellence. The same attributes that made it inexpensive and accessible, lightweight, minimal reinforcement, and simplified construction, were also what made it dangerous and unreliable. Viewed through modern eyes, the Ford Maverick of 1970 to 1977 is almost shocking in its fragility. Leaky fuel lines, jamming seatbelts, breakable steering components, and poor rust-proofing made it a vehicle that could betray the driver at any moment. Its poor crash performance meant that even minor collisions could result in serious injury, and its mechanical vulnerabilities demanded constant attention. And yet, for its owners, it remained a practical, stylish, and economical choice, one that required vigilance, patience, and a clear understanding of its limitations. It looked alive, it appealed to the eye, and affordable, yet fragile, poorly protected, and perilously close to failure in ordinary use. It was a car that could carry you forward, but it seemed almost poetically to resist survival on the road, as if it were aware of its own weaknesses. Driving a Maverick required respect, awareness, and a constant acknowledgement that while it offered mobility, convenience, and style, it offered little margin for error. It looked alive, it promised freedom, but it drove like it wanted to die. A fragile, flawed, and unforgettable compact of its era. If you want, I can take this even further and create an ultra-long, immersive narrative version of the Maverick, detailing daily life with the car, anecdotes from owners, near misses, and the visceral sense of fragility and danger, so it reads almost like a story from the road rather than just a review.